Barry, thank you very much. Well, if we go out of this afternoon's meeting and read about a major corporate failure, you'll know not to come to conferences addressed by me anymore. I thought this morning was terrific. I thought it was so exciting. I felt very proud on behalf of Tomorrow's Company to see the practical examples of corporate governance innovation, like the board mandate coming through this morning. And we heard from Mervyn King. Mervyn is so passionate about good corporate governance being crucial for the fulfillment of our responsibility to pass on the planet, society, the natural environment to our children in a better state than we inherited it. And a few weeks ago I was walking on Dartmoor, and my friends showed me there the wonderful oak trees of Wistman Wood. And this wood has survived for 500 years. There are ferns and liverwort, moss, lichen, bilberry plants growing on the trees, adders, foxes, many forms of life. Now, in Tomorrow's Company, this got me thinking, because some of my able colleagues are beginning to examine the lessons we can learn for business from nature. So think of the trees as companies. Think of the wood and its ecology and the climate around it as our wealth-creating system. The way we manage our woodland, I think, is a perfect metaphor for what we need to do in the relationship between our investment and our businesses. We can chop the trees, harvest the wood for an immediate cash benefit, perhaps. But if we do that, what are we left with? Barren land? We could insist on a rigid view that every tree must be in a line and every tree must be the same. Yeah? Do you recognize yourself, Forestry Commission? But that would ignore the wider value of the wood and the plants and the wildlife that thrive within it. The full importance to the forest, to us, comes from its diversity, from its webs of interdependence and the wider social value it has to those who use it. So, true stewards are the ones who take responsibility for the condition of the whole wood. And that's how in Tomorrow's Company we define stewardship. The active and responsible management of entrusted resources now and in the longer term, so as to hand them on in better condition. And that's true wherever you are in the value chain. A board member, a fund manager, a private or a family owner, an insurance company fiduciary, a trustee of a pension fund. All of those roles are roles which have a stewardship responsibility. And nor is this merely the custody of financial assets. Financial assets, I think we have learnt this morning, are only as good as the surrounding conditions allow them to be. I guess people investing in Libya are discovering that right now. And overall, our investment returns are in the end only as good as the wealth that companies generate. Ordinary savers and investors, of course, need an investment return in the narrowest sense. And let's not kid ourselves. You know, there are loads of private investors who'd love to make a quick buck as day traders. But for the majority of us, as savers and investors, what are we really concerned with? The survival of the whole wood, and not just the few trees that are currently in our portfolio. So our future pensions and life policies depend on there being a wealth-creating environment in which companies can flourish as a whole, tomorrow as well as today. The kind of companies, if I can now bring in, yes, the other Mervyn King, just to add to the confusion, the kind of companies that the Governor of the Bank of England was talking about last weekend when he said, companies that keep a clear vision of who their customers are and are run by people who don't think that they should simply maximise profits next week. So, investment value depends on company stewardship. Company stewardship, in turn, depends on wider the business ecology, and that, in turn, requires the right climate for the totality of wealth creation. Climate in the literal sense, biodiversity, talent and education, clean air, water, sanitation, infrastructure, a strong legal system, I have to say that here, ethics. So when fund managers talk about shareholder value, if they're including, in their definition of shareholder value, the promotion of long-term wealth creation in these healthy conditions, then there's no conflict between their definition of success and the ultimate needs of their clients. But most of them don't. They cannot or will not see the wood for the trees. The problem is that too few investors see shareholder value in stewardship terms. Many have been indoctrinated with the efficient markets hypothesis. They define investment performance in a way that excludes consideration of that wider environment that is needed. They tend to say, we're not in business to promote healthy companies, we're here to create shareholder value. And somehow magically, the capital markets and the corporate system is expected to convert this pursuit of higher share prices into better corporate performance. And that's the destructive weakness which is eating away at our investment system. A weakness that was so expensively exposed in the financial crisis. A crisis in which, as on the day when we held that breakfast meeting, our capital markets were shown to have steadily lost their grip on reality. Mervyn King talked about 2 books that he recommended to his interviewer on Saturday that should be read, and one of them was The Big Short, which is a wonderful exposure of that loss of that grip on reality. So shareholder return can in the end only be created by healthy companies, engaging and inspiring talented people to create excellent goods and services that somebody wants. So if fund managers are acting in the best interests of their clients, they'll want to ensure by their stewardship that they create the climate for this. Stewardship is the golden thread that links business, the economy, and society into a resilient fabric. As we've heard this morning, boards of directors play a vital part in this. As Sir Malcolm Williamson said, a good board is clear about its purpose and values in the company, clear about its strategic boundaries, its risk appetite. In other words, its mandate. The board mandate connects the stewardship role of directors with the stewardship role of investors. It's the investors who elect those boards in the first place. It's the investors to whom those boards are accountable. It's the investors who may or may not in the future, and I would hope that they are, become more involved in an effective nomination process of those directors, as discussed this morning. It's through dialogue with investors that a board mandate, once it's been worked through with the board itself, should be refined. And it's investors who can, by their ownership behaviours, strengthen the whole stewardship of the company by the board. And yet, I meet pension trustees who genuinely wonder how they can possibly be allowed to factor stewardship concerns into their decision-making. There are even advisors still telling them that they might be letting down their beneficiaries by so doing. I think this advice is wrong-headed dogma. And this is one reason why tomorrow's company is now embarking on a project entitled Why Stewardship Pays. And we intend to help people make sense of the enormous body of literature on this. And I think David Wheeler's in the room, and David gave us a marvellous sort of executive summary of the literature so far, which paraphrasing David, basically says there are no certainties. There is an impressive and growing body of evidence that it seems to show that attention to responsible investment and stewardship protects investors from some of the follies like subprime without exposing them to worse performance. And, of course, as we learnt this morning, the value drivers are changing. So the analogy that actually always works for me is it's a bit like house insurance. Nobody says, well, I'm not going to take out house insurance, fire insurance on my house until I've got a fully worked through business case academically refereed. You just do it because looking after your assets is a sensible thing to do. So in legal terms, it's now pretty clear that stewardship is an essential part of fiduciary duty. Globally, there's this momentum for change, reinforced by this growing understanding that we need to broaden our criteria of what value is. I think this is the path of sanity. And if we're going to follow this path in investment terms, let's now think about what needs to happen in practice. So for the last few years, Tomorrow's Company has been talking with companies, with fund managers, with pension funds, with government, with regulators. And through all of this, we are developing our own stewardship manifesto, and we're going to be launching that in full in a few months' time. In the meantime, whatever we do, we recognise we have to work with the grain of the market. But we do need the government and we do need regulators to create the conditions in which there are market rewards for those who put the considerations of long-term value above the manipulation of the share price. And in the manifesto, we'll be suggesting a number of practical steps for each of the links in the chain, and they need to be synchronized. On their own, no one of these chains would be effective. But taken in concert, working with boards, fund managers, fiduciaries, investment consultants, and so on, we can see the potential for really significant change. And to help steer this process, working with the grain of the market, we see two specific changes that government and our regulators in the UK need to make starting now. One is on the demand side of stewardship to help the people who are buying fund management services. One is on the supply side to help the people who supply fund management services. On the demand side, we're saying to the UK coalition government today, initiate a review of the fiduciary duty of pension trustees and others who take decisions on behalf of others in investment. And importantly, please do this in a way that ensures we do not add to the total regulatory burden on pension trustees. Most people would say that the duty of stewardship already exists. Indeed, for many trustees it goes without saying. But as I've said, there are still trustees and advisors who are getting away with the argument that it is somehow a luxury to be vigilant in the kind of ways that David Walker was advising us to be vigilant if we're to prevent another financial crash or similar disaster. And that's why we believe we need to make the consideration of stewardship of the company's trustees are invested in an explicit part of fiduciary duty. There's a very interesting parallel, looking back at the history of tomorrow's company, with the changes in company law. It was back in the early 90s, believe it or not, that tomorrow's company identified and successfully argued for change around the way in which directors' duties were defined. Most people accepted at the time that a director owed their duty to the company, but a lot of people still thought that actually directors owed their duty to shareholders and didn't understand that distinction. And so the myth was allowed to somehow survive, that directors should only focus on what the shareholders of the day wanted. In 2006, the law was changed based on the argument that it might have been perfectly adequate before for those who truly understood the law, but we still needed clarification in order to get the right behaviours. And I believe we have seen a change in behaviours since the 2006 Act came in. Today, I think we're in the same situation with stewardship. I think that we need to see reflected in codes, in rules, in legal arrangements, the clarity that trustees and other fiduciaries know that they're neglecting their duty if they fail to have a clear stewardship policy at the heart of their investment principles. And I repeat, this is not a proposal for adding to the burden on pension trustees. It's actually a proposal for simplifying their task and aligning it with common sense. And we also want to make the point that it's not only pension trustees whose job revolves around stewardship. We think the position of fiduciaries and insurance companies needs some attention. Insurance companies collect premiums from millions of policyholders and invest them on their behalf. The interests of the policyholders and the interests of the insurance companies and their shareholders are not always identical. It's time insurance companies were required to put in place clear and distinct arrangements through which the investment of their funds takes place on a basis of stewardship. And indeed, every organisation that is entrusted with money to invest should have a properly constituted and accountable body which is there to ensure proper stewardship of the assets under investment. So what we're suggesting is a kind of body like the Company Law Review involve the practitioners in order to come up with practical solutions. Take your time, get it right. But the overall objective, we think, should be creating a clear stewardship duty for all fiduciaries. And interestingly, Fair Pensions are coming up with a report at the end of this month on fiduciary duty. I think Christine Berry may be in the audience today from Fair Pensions and may want to comment in the discussion. We're talking to Fair Pensions, and we certainly hope that their report may be a springboard to the kind of changes that are needed. And the other thing we're saying is needed is that we need to change the stewardship code. And it's great we have Chris Hodge here, because he, more than most, is a man in a position to do it. At the moment, there are two weaknesses. Weakness one is that the code doesn't differentiate between excellence in stewardship and pretty ordinary tokenistic box-ticking stewardship, and we need that differentiation. And the other thing is that the code is on the basis of a whole investment house. A Deutsche Bank signs up for the code, but within Deutsche Bank there are hundreds of different funds with different investment styles. Unless you make it granular to the particular fund, it's not going to allow for effective accountability. So we would suggest a spectrum where level 1 is you cast your votes as a steward, and level 2 is you engage, and level 3 is you actually do the job thoroughly, making a real effort in conjunction with fellow investors to engage strategically, to discuss the board mandate, to collaborate on board nominations and so on. And just imagine what a difference it would make if each fund had to declare where it fitted on the spectrum. So with these two changes on the supply side, the demand side, we could open the way to the creation of stewardship mandates. This, in turn, will open the way on the supply side to a growing section of the fund management industry which does take stewardship seriously, and that will begin to make it possible for retail funds as well to offer their services to ordinary citizens who want to have stewardship ISAs and so on. And then we want to see the industry promoting the best in excellence, in quality assurance, in self-assessment, so that there's actually, like in the quality movement, a momentum to higher standards rather than box-ticking. In tomorrow's company, we intend to do all we can to promote this agenda. Fairly or unfairly, many people are unhappy with the banks. If the government adopts this agenda, I think they're in a very strong position to say we are acting. But actually, citizens, you have some chain of accountability which connects you with the banks, and it is through the shareholder chain that it is far more logical that you should influence the banks rather than by government imposition. And citizens taking responsibility themselves for stewarding their investments, isn't that what the big society is supposed to be all about? So we believe that through this agenda for the stewardship economy, we'll be starting to create behavioural change rather than heavy-handed regulation, beyond regulation indeed. We should in time see a steady reduction in the need for further regulation as engaged investors acting on clear mandates take up the slack. If we follow this agenda, we'll be taking important steps towards a stewardship economy, one in which there is a golden thread connecting the ordinary person and their savings with the decisions directors take in the boardrooms of our big companies. Thank you very much.